The secret my uncle hid. A family reunion twist no one saw coming. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I raised my glass to the man who was actively trying to destroy us. The crystal flute felt heavy in my hand, the golden champagne catching the flickering light of the antique chandelier hanging above the long mahogany dining table. Around me, my family clapped and cheered, their faces glowing with sheer admiration for the man seated next to the head of the table. Uncle Julian. He offered a practiced, humble smile, raising his own glass in acknowledgement. To everyone else in this room, he was the prodigal son returning home to honor our grandfather's 80th birthday. To me, he was a desperate, dangerous predator cornered in his final hunting ground. My name is Elias. I am 34 years old, and I work as an archivist and historian for a state museum. My life is built on preserving the truth through documents, maintaining records, and protecting history from the ravages of deceit. I am a quiet man, the family's unofficial memory keeper, the one who organizes the photo albums and remembers the exact dates of distant relatives' passings. Nobody pays much attention to the archivist until they need a fact checked. But my profession trained me to look for inconsistencies. It trained me to spot the missing pages, the erased margins, and the subtle, terrifying gaps in the official narrative. Tonight, the stakes were unimaginably high. We were gathered at Blackwood Manor, our family's sprawling, isolated estate nestled deep in the damp, ancient woods of upstate New York. It's a creaky, shadow-filled house that holds generations of our bloodline's memories. And Julian was about to steal it all. I looked down the table at Grandpa Arthur. He sat in his velvet armchair, a fragile, confused 80-year-old man who loved his son more than life itself. I took a slow sip of my champagne, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I was about to detonate a bomb that would shatter this family forever, but I had absolutely no other choice. The monster sitting across from me was about to make his final, devastating move. To understand the magnitude of the impending disaster, you have to understand the mythology of Uncle Julian. In our family, he was not just a relative, he was a living legend. Julian was Grandpa Arthur's eldest son, the charismatic, sharply dressed international businessman who left our quiet town decades ago to conquer the world. While the rest of us settled into predictable, modest lives, Julian supposedly brokered massive deals in London, Dubai, and Tokyo. He sent exotic postcards, shipped expensive wines for the holidays, and always had a thrilling anecdote about a near miss with a foreign billionaire. Compared to Julian, my life was practically invisible. As an archivist, my days were spent in the silent, temperature-controlled basement of a museum, cataloging century-old land deeds and preserving fragile paper with cotton gloves. I loved my quiet life, but in the eyes of my family, I was simply steady Elias, reliable, dull, and completely unremarkable. Whenever Julian visited, the oxygen in the room belonged entirely to him. Grandpa Arthur absolutely worshipped the ground Julian walked on. As Arthur's mind slowly began to fade with early-stage dementia, his fixation on his golden boy only intensified. The week of Arthur's 80th birthday was meant to be a grand, joyous celebration. We all drove out to Blackwood Manor, preparing for a 7-day retreat. The house is a sprawling Victorian beast, full of narrow corridors, heavy oak doors, and a pervasive, creeping dampness that chills you right to the bone. It is completely isolated, a solid 40-minute drive from the nearest functioning town. When Julian's sleek black town car crunched up the long gravel driveway on Monday afternoon, the entire family rushed to the porch to greet him. He stepped out wearing a tailored Italian suit, flashing that brilliant, million-dollar smile that had charmed investors and family members alike for 30 years. He embraced Grandpa Arthur, whispering comforting words that brought tears to the old man's eyes. Cousin Clara, my sharp-tongued ally, stood next to me on the porch, rolling her eyes at the theatrics. But as Julian walked past us to bring his leather luggage inside, the heavy front doors swung shut behind him, plunging the hallway into a gloomy, muted shadow. That was the very first moment I realized something was terribly, fundamentally wrong with the golden boy. The man standing in our foyer was sweating profusely despite the freezing autumn air. Julian immediately launched into a captivating story about a delayed flight from Zurich. waving his hands expressively as the family gathered around him in the dimly lit parlor. Laughter echoed off the dusty walls, but I stood silently near the heavy velvet curtains, observing him with the trained eye of a historian examining a questionable artifact. When you spend your entire life studying details, the anomalies always scream at you. The first red flag was his watch. Julian had always flaunted a stunning, vintage Patek Philippe, a supposed gift from a grateful client in Geneva. As he gestured wildly, the heavy gold timepiece slipped out from under his crisp white cuff. I stared at it. The sweeping motion of the second hand was entirely wrong. It was ticking in harsh, rigid intervals, the unmistakable, undeniable hallmark of a cheap quartz movement hidden inside a counterfeit casing. The real Patek was gone, replaced by a desperate illusion. Then, there was his physical appearance. Beneath the expensive cologne and the perfectly styled hair, Julian looked utterly ravaged. The skin around his eyes was bruised with exhaustion, and his hands possessed a subtle, continuous tremor. When Grandpa Arthur wasn't looking, Julian's charismatic smile would instantly collapse, replaced by a grimace of sheer, terrifying panic. He looked exactly like a man who was constantly checking over his shoulder for an approaching executioner. That night, the house settled into a deep, oppressive silence. Blackwood Manor is an acoustic nightmare. Every footstep echoes, and the old pipes groan in the walls. At 2 a.m, I walked down the hall to fetch a glass of water from the kitchen. As I passed the guest suite, I heard a floorboard creak, followed by the frantic, hushed sound of Julian's voice bleeding through the heavy wooden door. "I told you I need until Saturday," he hissed into the phone, his tone completely stripped of its usual bravado. "He's going to sign it. You'll get your money. Just call them off. Please, I'm begging you, don't send them here." I froze in the freezing corridor, my breath turning to mist in the drafty air. The golden boy wasn't making international business deals in the middle of the night. He was pleading for his life with someone terrifying. I retreated to my room, realizing a deeply dangerous presence had infiltrated our home. By Wednesday morning, the atmosphere in Blackwood Manor had shifted from celebratory to deeply suffocating. Julian executed a masterful, aggressive campaign of isolation. Whenever any family member tried to sit with Grandpa Arthur in the sunroom, Julian would smoothly intervene, placing a firm hand on their shoulder and ushering them away under the guise of letting the old man rest. He hovered over Arthur like a vulture circling a wounded animal. Arthur's dementia was usually manageable, presenting as mild confusion regarding recent events or repeating old stories. But under Julian's intense, unyielding pressure, the 80-year-old patriarch visibly withered. The confusion morphed into a quiet, constant state of anxiety. Julian was intentionally destabilizing him. I witnessed the most chilling exchange on Thursday afternoon. I was in the adjacent conservatory, cataloging some old family photographs, hidden from view by a row of massive, overgrown ferns. Julian wheeled Arthur into the room, stopping right by the glass doors. "Dad, you have to listen to me," Julian said, his voice low and incredibly forceful. "The government is coming for the estate taxes. The new laws are brutal. If you don't transfer the deed into the protective trust once set up, Elias and Clara will be left with absolutely nothing. They will lose this house." "Lose the house?" Arthur stammered, his frail hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair, his eyes wide with genuine terror. No. I promised your mother we would always keep Blackwood safe. I don't understand these new laws, Julian." "You don't have to understand, Dad. You just have to trust me," Julian purred, a sickeningly sweet tone masking the venom of his manipulation. "I have the documents ready. We'll sign them at the dinner on Saturday. I will protect our family's assets. I promise." My blood ran completely cold. Julian was leveraging Arthur's deepest fears and his failing memory to orchestrate a massive, irrevocable theft. He was using the threat of losing the estate to actually steal it from right under our noses. I couldn't just sit there and watch my grandfather be psychologically tortured. I needed hard, undeniable proof of what this monster was truly planning. That night, I decided to cross a line I had never dared to cross. Blackwood Manor at 3 a.m. is a terrifying place. The shadows stretch long and dark, and the absolute silence presses against your eardrums until they ring. I slipped out of my bed, pulling a thick sweater over my pajamas, and crept down the grand, curving staircase, testing every single wooden step to avoid the ones that whined. I was channeling every cold case detective I had ever watched in those late-night documentaries. I needed paper trails. I needed the truth. My destination was Grandpa Arthur's ancestral library, a dusty, cavernous room filled with leather-bound volumes and the heavy, metallic scent of old ink. Arthur had always been a meticulous record keeper, much like myself. For decades, he kept every bank statement, deed, and tax return perfectly organized in a row of heavy, green steel filing cabinets nestled in the corner of the study. He proudly maintained an open-door policy, insisting the family's legacy was an open book. I turned the brass knob of the library door and slipped inside, clicking on a small, focused penlight. I navigated through the maze of antique furniture until I reached the filing cabinets. I reached out and pulled the brass handle of the top drawer. It didn't budge. I yanked harder. Locked. A cold sweat broke out across my neck. Arthur never locked these cabinets. He didn't even know where the original keys were anymore. Someone had recently installed a brand new, high-security cylindrical lock on the master drawer. Julian. He was actively burying the evidence. Fortunately, my job as an archivist often required me to access sealed antique trunks and forgotten lockboxes donated to the museum. I possessed a very specific set of skills that my family knew absolutely nothing about. I pulled a small leather pouch from my pocket, unrolling it to reveal a pristine set of steel tension wrenches and lock picks. My hands shook slightly as I knelt on the dusty Persian rug, sliding the tension tool into the keyway. I took a deep breath, focusing entirely on the tiny, metallic clicks echoing in the silent room. 1 pin, 2 pins, 3 pins. The mechanism resisted slightly, but I applied gentle, consistent pressure, my heart pounding violently against my ribs as I prayed Julian wasn't awake. The heavy steel drawer finally yielded with a loud clack, exposing the hidden files. The pungent smell of aged paper and fresh printer ink hit my nose as I pulled the heavy drawer open. I shone my penlight directly onto the neatly arranged manila folders. The tabs were meticulously labeled in Julian's sharp, aggressive handwriting, not Grandpa Arthur's shaky, elegant cursive. Julian had completely reorganized the family's financial history to hide his tracks. I pulled the most recent folder, labeled Arthur Estate, Current Accounts, and spread the documents across the massive oak desk. I felt like a forensic accountant dissecting a corpse. I started with the primary checking and savings accounts from the last 36 months. As I ran my finger down the columns of numbers, a chilling, distinct pattern began to emerge from the black and white ink. Massive, systematic withdrawals. Every single month, on the 15th, exactly $25,000 was wired out of Arthur's primary high-yield savings account. The destination for every single transaction was listed as Global Vanguard Holdings LLC. I flipped through the subsequent pages, my dread multiplying with every sheet of paper. Over the course of 3 years, Julian had quietly siphoned nearly $900,000 in pure cash. I dug deeper into the drawer, hunting for any documentation justifying these catastrophic losses. I found a stack of glossy, official-looking quarterly reports bearing the Global Vanguard Holdings logo. The reports claimed the money was being aggressively invested in emerging foreign markets, promising astronomical returns. They were signed by the firm's managing director, Julian Blackwood. He had convinced Arthur that he was building a protective financial fortress for the family's future. Instead, he was bleeding the patriarch completely dry. But the money had to be going somewhere. A man stealing almost $1 million shouldn't be wearing a counterfeit watch and shaking in the middle of the night. The math was entirely wrong, and the massive discrepancy terrified me to my very core. I realized I was looking at the desperate actions of a man drowning in a violently deep ocean of debt. I grabbed my phone, intending to take high-resolution photos of the wire transfer dates and the forged investment returns. Suddenly, the library door creaked open, and a beam of light hit my face. My heart violently seized in my chest. I blindly threw my hands up to shield my eyes from the blinding glare of the flashlight. I braced myself for Julian's wrath, knowing I had just been caught red-handed unraveling his massive criminal enterprise. "Elias? What the hell are you doing in the dark?" A sharp, feminine whisper echoed through the study. I lowered my hands, exhaling a ragged, trembling breath. It wasn't Julian. It was Cousin Clara. She was standing in the doorway wearing an oversized college sweatshirt, holding her smartphone like a weapon. Clara is a corporate lawyer, brilliant, deeply cynical, and entirely intolerant of family drama. She walked toward the desk, her eyes darting between my lock-picking tools and the scattered financial documents. "Clara, shut the door," I hissed urgently, waving her in. "You need to see this right now." She closed the heavy oak door and approached the desk, crossing her arms defensively. "Are you breaking into Grandpa's files? Elias, have you lost your absolute mind? If Julian catches you..." "Julian is stealing everything," I interrupted, shoving the glossy quarterly reports and the bank statements directly into her hands. "Look at the watermarks, Clara. Look at the specific dates of the wire transfers. He's drained almost $1 million in 36 months under the guise of an investment firm he supposedly runs." Clara scoffed, shaking her head as she looked down at the papers. "Elias, this is absurd. Julian is a multimillionaire. Why would he steal from Grandpa? These are probably just legitimate, high-risk wealth management accounts. Look at the routing numbers, Clara." I pressed, my voice raw with desperate urgency. "I know how to read historical ledgers. These aren't investments. This is a systematic, unauthorized liquidation of Arthur's liquid assets." She fell silent, her legal training finally overriding her lifelong family conditioning. She traced the forged loop of Julian's signature on the documents, her cynical expression slowly crumbling into a look of absolute, sickening realization. She looked up at me, her face pale, and whispered a terrifying, undeniable truth. "This doesn't make any sense," Clara whispered, her lawyer's brain kicking into overdrive. "Global Vanguard Holdings. I've never heard of them, and I work with international wealth management firms every single day." "That's exactly what I thought," I replied, pulling my laptop out of my leather satchel. "Let's do what we do best. You analyze the legal structure, and I will track the historical data." We sat together on the dusty floor of the library, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating our determined faces. I accessed a series of specialized international corporate registry databases that I frequently used at the museum to track the provenance of donated, high-value artifacts. I typed in Global Vanguard Holdings LLC, expecting to find a shell company registered in Delaware or the Cayman Islands. The search results returned absolutely nothing. 0 hits. "Try searching the UK registry," Clara suggested, leaning closer to the screen. He claimed his headquarters were located in London. I accessed the British corporate database. Again, nothing. The company literally did not exist. I didn't stop there. I began searching for Julian's name across various international court records and bankruptcy filings. The illusion of the golden boy shattered completely with the next page load. Julian wasn't a wealthy businessman. According to public court documents from Nevada and Florida, he had filed for massive personal bankruptcy 7 years ago after a series of catastrophic, highly illegal real estate speculations completely collapsed. He had 0 assets. His exotic business trips were likely just him running from angry creditors. The extravagant gifts he sent the family were bought with credit cards he never paid off, just to maintain the psychological facade. Julian's entire existence for the past decade had been a meticulous, desperate fabrication. He was a ruined, hollow man, wearing a counterfeit watch, bleeding his elderly father dry just to keep the terrifying wolves at bay. We were dealing with a cornered animal. Clara grabbed my arm, her eyes locked on the laptop screen in pure horror. Before Clara could even speak, we heard the distinct, heavy thud of footsteps pacing directly above us in the guest suite. Julian was awake. We quickly powered down the laptop and sat in the pitch-black darkness of the library, barely daring to breathe. "He's on the move," Clara whispered in my ear. "I'm going to the 2nd floor to see what he's doing. You stay here and secure the documents." She slipped out of the library like a shadow. I spent the next 10 minutes rapidly taking high-definition photographs of every single forged document, wire transfer receipt, and fake investment portfolio, carefully placing the physical files back into the cabinet exactly as I had found them. I locked the drawer, wiping down the brass handle with my sleeve, leaving no trace of my midnight investigation. When I finally crept up to the 2nd floor landing, I found Clara huddled in the dark alcove near Julian's bedroom door. She was visibly trembling, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach. I pulled her down the hallway into my bedroom and locked the door behind us. "What did you hear?" I demanded, keeping my voice incredibly low. "Elias, it's bad. It's so much worse than bankruptcy," Clara gasped, her professional composure entirely shattered. He was on a cheap burner phone. He wasn't talking to a bank or a standard creditor. He was speaking to someone absolutely terrifying. He kept apologizing, begging them not to hurt him. She took a shaky breath, her eyes wide with genuine fear. He told the man on the phone, "I swear to God, the house will be mine by Saturday. It's worth $3 million. You will get every single penny I owe you. Just don't touch my family. Elias, he is in deep with violent loan sharks." The stakes instantly escalated from a devastating financial crime to a literal life-or-death situation. Julian wasn't just stealing the house out of greed. He was sacrificing our ancestral home to save his own life from violent criminals. If we didn't stop him, we would lose Blackwood Manor to the mob. I realized we had less than 48 hours to completely destroy the Golden Boy. Friday morning arrived with heavy, gray rain lashing against the massive windows of Blackwood Manor. The oppressive weather perfectly matched the psychological tension suffocating the house. Julian was in peak performance mode, charming the arriving relatives and ordering caterers around for Saturday's grand birthday dinner. Clara and I communicated entirely through subtle glances and encrypted text messages, knowing we were walking on a highly explosive minefield. While Julian was distracted downstairs, playing the perfect host to Aunt May and Uncle Robert, I slipped into his private guest suite. It was a massive risk, but I needed to find the actual weapon he planned to use against Arthur. The room was meticulously clean, but my archivist eyes caught a slight imperfection. The heavy mahogany desk drawer was closed, but a tiny sliver of a blue legal folder was caught in the seam. I pulled the folder free. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents drawn up by a shady, out-of-state law firm. The title page read, "Irrevocable Transfer of Deed and Complete Asset Reallocation." It wasn't a protective trust. It was a complete, immediate surrender of the Blackwood estate directly into Julian's name. There were no provisions for Arthur's medical care, no stipulations for the rest of the family. Once the ink dried on the signature line, Julian would own the $3 million property outright, and he would immediately liquidate it to pay off his illicit underworld debts. I flipped to the back page. A yellow sticky note was attached near the signature line. In Julian's handwriting, it read, "Execute Saturday, 8 p.m., dinner toast." He was going to use the emotional high of the 80th birthday celebration, surrounded by clapping, adoring family members, to pressure a confused 80-year-old man into signing away his entire life. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. I pulled out my phone and photographed every single page of the lethal contract. I slipped out of the room just as I heard heavy footsteps approaching the door. We spent all of Friday afternoon locked inside Clara's bedroom, converting my digital photographs into a devastating, undeniable physical dossier. We couldn't just accuse Julian verbally. He was far too charismatic. He would easily spin our accusations, painting me as the jealous, boring archivist making up vicious lies to ruin his reputation. We needed hard, overwhelming, documentary evidence that could not be debated, dismissed, or manipulated by his silver tongue. Clara used her portable law office printer to run off dozens of pages. We printed the bank statements highlighting the massive, systematic $900,000 drain. We printed the fake Global Vanguard Holdings quarterly reports. We printed the official database screenshots proving the investment firm was a total phantom. We printed the public Nevada bankruptcy filings from 7 years ago, permanently shattering the illusion of his immense wealth. Finally, we printed the most damning piece of evidence, the irrevocable transfer contract I had photographed in his room. Clara meticulously organized the pages into 10 identical, thick black binders, one for every adult family member attending the grand dinner. "We have to execute this perfectly, Elias," Clara whispered, snapping the final binder shut. "If we confront him in private, he will lie, destroy the documents, and probably try to harm us. We have to do it in front of an audience. We have to corner him in the light." "The dinner toast," I replied, feeling a cold, terrifying resolve settling deep into my bones. When he asked Grandpa Arthur to sign the deed in front of everyone, We drop the binders on the table. We strip him of his legendary status right in front of the people he needs to manipulate. We hid the heavy black binders under the false bottom of my large suitcase. We had successfully built a bomb made entirely of paper and ink. Now, we just had to survive the psychological warfare long enough to reach the dinner table. I walked down the hall for dinner, but someone was waiting in the dark. I stepped out of my room into the dimly lit, creaky hallway, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Julian was leaning casually against the floral wallpaper right next to my door, completely hidden in the shadows until I was mere inches away from him. He was nursing a crystal tumbler of straight whiskey. The charismatic smile was completely gone, replaced by a cold, dead stare that made my blood freeze in my veins. "Elias," he said smoothly, taking a slow sip of his drink. "You've been awfully busy today. You and Clara practically barricaded yourselves upstairs. Preparing a special birthday surprise for Dad?" "Just organizing some old family history, Julian," I replied, forcing my voice to remain perfectly level despite the absolute terror gripping my throat. "You know how I am. Always buried in the boring past." Julian stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of expensive cologne and cheap alcohol washed over me. He looked down at me, his eyes entirely void of humanity. He wasn't the golden boy right now. He was the desperate, cornered animal in debt to violent men. "The past is a dangerous place to dig, Elias," Julian whispered, his voice dropping to a menacing, gravelly pitch. "Sometimes you unearth things that are better left buried. You're a smart guy? A quiet, steady guy? I would absolutely hate to see a quiet guy like you get hurt because he decided to meddle in complicated, grown-up business." It was a direct, undeniable threat. He suspected I knew something, even if he didn't realize the massive scale of the dossier we had built. He was trying to intimidate me into silence. "I just preserve the truth, Julian," I said, holding his dead stare without blinking. "The documents always speak for themselves." Julian's jaw clenched tightly. For a terrifying second, I thought he was going to physically attack me right there in the hallway. Instead, he forced a hollow, chilling smile. He patted my cheek violently and walked downstairs to orchestrate his final, devastating financial heist. Saturday night arrived, and the grand dining room of Blackwood Manor was ablaze with candlelight. The long mahogany table was covered in crystal, silver, and extravagant floral arrangements. Grandpa Arthur sat at the head of the table, looking incredibly frail but happy, surrounded by 14 members of his adoring family. Clara and I sat near the middle, the heavy black binders resting silently on our laps beneath the long, white linen tablecloth. The air was thick with roasted meats and expensive wine. As the dessert plates were finally cleared away, Julian stood up. The room instantly fell into a reverent, absolute silence. He raised his crystal flute of champagne, offering that sickeningly perfect, practiced smile. "To my father," Julian began, his voice choked with manufactured emotion. "A man who built this family legacy with his bare hands. I have traveled the entire world, built businesses, and met extraordinary people, but I have never met a man as great as Arthur Blackwood. And it is my absolute honor to ensure his legacy is protected forever." The family practically swooned. Julian smoothly reached into his tailored jacket and produced the blue legal folder, sliding it gently onto the table in front of Arthur, right next to an expensive fountain pen. "Dad," as we discussed, Julian whispered, loudly enough for the table to hear. "These are the protective trust documents. Just a formality to keep the government away from the estate. Sign here, and you'll never have to worry about a thing." Arthur looked down at the lethal contract, his hands trembling with confusion. He reached out with frail, shaking fingers to pick up the silver fountain pen. The trap was fully set. The golden boy was seconds away from stealing our home and our future. I looked across the table at Clara. She gave me a single, sharp nod. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs loudly scraping against the floorboards. I stood up, gripping the heavy black binder, and prepared to destroy the golden boy. "Do not sign that document, Grandpa." My voice rang out, echoing sharply against the crystal glasses. I slammed the thick black binder onto the center of the dining table with a deafening thud. Before anyone could react, Clara moved with military precision, sliding identical binders in front of every single adult at the table. "Elias, what on earth are you doing?" Aunt May gasped, looking at the black binder as if it were a venomous snake. "I am protecting our family," I stated coldly, staring directly into Julian's suddenly panicked eyes. "Open the binders." Page 1. The synchronized rustling of paper filled the silent room. "You are looking at public bankruptcy filings from Nevada," I announced, projecting my voice like a prosecutor in a courtroom. "Uncle Julian is not an international businessman. He is completely bankrupt." Turn to page 3. Those are bank statements proving he has stolen $900,000 from Grandpa Arthur over the past 3 years under the guise of a fake investment firm. "This is an absolute outrage. These are lies." Julian roared, his charismatic mask instantly dissolving into pure, panicked desperation. He reached out to grab Arthur's folder, but Clara snatched it away. "Look at the document he just gave Grandpa," Clara commanded the stunned family. "It's an irrevocable transfer of the deed. He isn't protecting the estate. He is stealing it tonight to pay off massive, violent loan sharks." The family stared at the undeniable, concrete evidence in absolute horror. The mismatched watermarks, the forged signatures, the explicit court documents. Julian looked around the room, realizing the mythological fortress he had built around himself had completely collapsed in less than 60 seconds. His face contorted into an expression of vicious, unhinged rage. He lunged across the mahogany table directly toward me, screaming obscenities, shattering crystal glasses and plates in his violent, desperate path. He grabbed me by the collar, but the flashing red lights outside stopped him cold. Clara hadn't just prepared the dossiers. She had proactively contacted the State Financial Fraud Division earlier that afternoon. When the police officers burst through the heavy oak doors of Blackwood Manor, Julian's violent struggle immediately ceased. He was handcuffed and dragged out into the freezing rain, screaming threats at us until the cruiser door finally slammed shut. He looked nothing like a legend. He just looked like a pathetic, ruined thief. The fallout was utterly devastating for our family. Grandpa Arthur was physically safe, and his beloved estate was legally protected, but his heart was entirely shattered. The profound betrayal by his favorite son accelerated his cognitive decline in the months that followed. It is a terrible, haunting thing to watch a parent realize that the child they worshipped viewed them only as a disposable ATM. The family dynamic permanently shifted. The quiet archivist was no longer ignored, but the victory tasted entirely like ash. We spent the next year dealing with forensic accountants, slowly untangling the massive, complex web of Julian's financial crimes. If there is a lesson to be extracted from this nightmare, it is the profound danger of idolizing our family members. We allowed Julian's charisma and legendary status to blind us to the glaring, undeniable red flags. We excused his strange behavior because it was easier than confronting the terrifying truth that a monster was sitting at our dinner table. Never let emotional mythology override cold, hard facts. If someone is isolating a vulnerable elder, demanding absolute secrecy, and pushing for rapid financial signatures, you must become the investigator. Demand the documents, verify the credentials, and never be afraid to disrupt the family peace to protect those who cannot protect themselves. True legacy isn't about blind loyalty. It is about defending the truth at all costs. We saved Blackwood Manor, but the ghost of the golden boy will haunt these halls forever. The truth always demands a heavy price, and some wounds will simply never fully heal.